MJD, which quarterback has the most favorable matchup of all this week?
Any quarterback that's going against the Dallas Cowboys defense, I'm going to say, and this week is Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray has been lights out to this point, averaging 7 yards per rush, rushing touchdowns, throwing the ball. We saw the big throw against DeAndre Hopkins at the end of the game against the New York Jets. Expect a lot of that. I think Kyler Murray is going to have a huge Monday night performance.
It's good to see Kyler Murray going downfield a little bit more. It's also going to be good to see Cam Newton back on the field for the New England Patriots. He has been cleared from the COVID-19 list, so he's on track to play against the Broncos this Sunday. And Denver's given up the 7th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. They have the 2nd lowest QB pressure rate in the league, and you can tell that is really where they're missing Von Miller right now. I mean, Cam torched the Seahawks, who couldn't get a pass rush on him. I think he's going to do the same this week to Denver.
Yeah, I'm very excited to see Cam Newton back out there on the field. One player I'm not excited about, but he's got a good matchup, is Kirk Cousins. He's had at least two passing touchdowns in 2 of his last 3 games. And of course, going against the Atlanta Falcons, that team's allowed the most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season, over 30 points per game. They've allowed 300 passing yards in all 5 games this season. Of course, the Bears combined with Trubisky in full. So if you're going matchup-wise, it's Kirk Cousins. He just has to cut out the turnovers. Like, everything's good except for the turnovers, but again, it's a great matchup.
All right, let's look over at running backs. Who's primed for a big week 6?
I'm looking at James Robinson going up against the Detroit Lions, who've allowed the most rushing yards per game this season. They're averaging they're allowing more than 170 rushing yards. They've allowed the 4th most fantasy points to running backs this season. And of course, Robinson has been one of the most consistent guys at the position. He's currently the RB12, which makes him one of the best. And you know what? I know a lot of people always love to talk about perhaps trading him because his value's high, but when you get a guy like this, you hold on to him. You take care of him, and you make sure that he's in your lineup each and every week because this guy's a bona fide stud.
That is a true running back love story for me. It's maybe a sneaky great week for Myles Gaskin, a week where there's not a lot of great matchups on paper. He had the first rushing touchdown of the season. On the goal line against the Niners, that's important because people have been worried about him losing goal line carries to Jordan Howard. He's been a serviceable starter without touchdowns. And perhaps now that the staff trusts him in the red zone against the number 28 defense against running backs, I'm going to go. Let's go, Myles Gaskin this week.
Yeah, for me, guys, it's going to be Alexander Mattison or Dalvin Cook, whoever is healthy. If Dalvin's healthy, I'm going to play him. If not, Alexander Mattison going against the Falcons. Listen, the Falcons defense has just been giving up a ton of points and yards to backs. Last week, Mike Davis had a field day. I think Alexander Mattison, as we saw against the Seattle Seahawks, as we're watching here, has another opportunity to go out there and be great. And I think the Vikings want to continue to get the ball in their playmakers' hands, and that's these running backs down the field running the ball. And it's going to allow, obviously, Rank, who's not happy about Kirk Cousins, but to be able to use that play-action pass down the field. So I think Alexander Mattison will be a great start, or has a great matchup this week.
All right, Marcus, what wideout's making you happy this week?
I'm thinking we're going to get some good juju this week. I know people have been concerned about Juju Smith-Schuster. Deontay Johnson's played well. Chase Claypool had the big week last week, but it's a good matchup against the Browns. They've allowed the most receiving yards and tied for the most touchdowns allowed to slot receivers. So I think this is a week that the Steelers look to get the ball back in Juju's hands, get him going a little bit. Plus, maybe we can see some fun touchdown celebrations.
Yeah, I like that pick a lot. I also like DeAndre Hopkins against the Cowboys for a lot of the reasons that MJD was talking about, not the least of which is him catching the ball with one hand. He's averaged over 100 receiving yards per game this season. The Cowboys have allowed the 3rd most fantasy points per game to wideouts, and they've had a top 12 wide receiver go against them in 4 consecutive games. This is the easiest start to even make for this entire week.
I'm going to go with A.J. Brown. A few days after he was a part of Josh Norman's miserable Tuesday night, the Texans secondary had one of their best games of the year against Jacksonville, but this is still a bad matchup against the healthy now A.J. Brown. Had 9 targets in his first game back. They get Adam Humphries back, but Corey Davis, we still don't know what his status is going to be. I think it's a great week for A.J. Brown. Time's running out for folks to turn around a struggling fantasy roster, but we're going to do our best to save your season. Marcus and I joined now by Cynthia Frelund. Cynthia, help the people out. Who should we try to trade for in fantasy right now?
Well, I'm always looking for people who maybe have a bad matchup this week that you could leverage that to get them at a low rate so then you can get them when they're going to get better even going forward. And the first is Robbie Anderson. He gets the Bears this week, which is not a great matchup on paper. The Bears defense is very good. However, Anderson has sneakily been wide receiver number 10 on the season, 5+ targets, 50+ yards, one of just 2 players in the NFL to achieve that in all 5 games so far. And you want to look to see that 17+ points per game in 4 of 5 games. That's going to continue because he is Teddy Bridgewater's #1 option. It's just the way it is. So it doesn't matter that this matchup looks bad on paper with the Bears. Just use that to kind of sell your opponent to trade for him so that you can end up with Anderson. And then that brings me to my second stock up guy. That's Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley kind of quietly is turning back into the Todd Gurley we were used to in the past. 17th among running backs in terms of fantasy points per game. Okay, that's fine. But touches, points, all have increased in 2 straight games. And you know what happens when you lose a coach? You typically see teams go back to the basics. The basics of rushing the football and short passes to Todd Gurley, keep the pressure off Matt Ryan, and keep their defense off the field. That's how